Welcome to Preparing for AI, the AI podcast for everybody, with your hosts Jimmy Rhodes and me, Matt Cartwright. We explore the human and social impacts of AI, looking at the impact on jobs, AI and sustainability, and most importantly, the urgent need for safe development of AI, governance and alignment. Another broken afternoon, a whole life just scattered and strewn across the bathroom floor. And I'll draw the blinds and lock the doors. We need some help. I can only help you hurt yourself. I threw it all down the wishing well. Don't throw it all down the wishing well. Welcome to Preparing for AI with me, Haruki Murakami.
And me, Masayoshi Son.
And we are coming at you this week live from, well, I'm not. I'm actually coming at you from my bedroom. But Jimmy, you're coming at us live from where?
My hotel room in Japan. I'm excited to be in Hokkaido this week.
Yeah, and we decided that even though you're in darkest Japan, and you are in the darkest part of Japan because it's the most northerly latitude-wise, that we would give our listeners the treat of yet another, not emergency podcast, but an urgent podcast, be it all the news that's been going on this week in the AI world.
Yeah.
So
most of our episodes aren't really, what's the word? They don't need to be out at a particular time, do they? But there's been so much news recently, so yeah.
So we thought we'd do another one. So we I guess let's start off, even though I don't want this episode to be another kind of DeepSeek one, because I actually checked my inbox the other day and I deleted a load of emails and I'd left some emails in there that generally AI stuff that I couldn't be bothered to read. And three of them, all from completely different people, were all titled The DeepSeek Effect. And they were completely separate things. And it just kind of showed how like everybody was kind of onto the DeepSeek thing. And I was listening to a podcast last night where they were kind of saying, it wasn't an AI podcast, but they talk about AI and they were saying like, we want to stop talking about DeepSeek. So we want to stop talking about DeepSeek, but we're going to start off by talking about DeepSeek, aren't we? Because I think we need to.
I think it's still a huge deal. I think it's still a massive, considering how stale AI was getting, I'm happy to talk about it. And I've got some views I'm going to share tonight, a bit of an update on my thoughts on the future of AI as well. So quite excited about it again.
So let's dig in then. So did they lie about their training costs? Have they been distilling OpenAI? What do you think? We should probably explain what distilling means as well.
Yeah. So first thing is, just to clarify for people who aren't up to speed, there's been a whole load of news articles since DeepSeek was released upon the world, and since $500 billion was lost off the US stock market. And they were started by OpenAI, and I think Elon Musk as well, people like that, some of the tech bros. They said that it wasn't trained. They've got all these GPUs that they're hiding, all this kind of stuff. A few people mixed into that, like how much the GPUs actually cost in the first place. So whether they've got these 50,000 GPUs lying about, they said they trained it on 2,000, sort of bringing that into question. Some people have mixed into it the cost of the actual GPUs themselves, which I find a bit odd. So just for clarity for people who listen to the podcast, normally when OpenAI talk about training, when Google talk about training, Meta, when anyone talks about training an AI model, they're not talking about the infrastructure cost of buying the GPUs and the data centers and things like that. They're talking about the cost of training that model. It's basically electricity, pretty much, and infrastructure costs like overheads for running these data centers, things like that. They're not normally talking about the actual cost of the GPUs, because obviously you're going to use the GPUs to train your next model and your next model and your next model. So just to clarify, what DeepSeek was saying, as I understand it, was basically it costs $6.2 million worth of electricity. They obviously have tons of GPUs lying about because they're this quant trading company. So they have these GPUs already, and they're using some of them in what they're saying to train this model. Now the argument is that you couldn't possibly have trained this model, and they're lying about it, and it's actually cost more ultimately. I don't think we'll ever know the answer to that, to be honest. It's very possibly a lie. I think the only thing that I think, the only reason I think it might not be, or maybe that it might not be, but like it would be a bit of a dubious lie, is that they've open sourced everything. And so I think we mentioned it on the podcast last time, but in theory, people can pretty much just go and replicate their entire methodology because they've open sourced so much of the information about how they trained it. And so if they're lying about it, it'll be relatively short-lived. And also, not to get too technical, but a lot of things about the way the model works kind of do add up in terms of they've demonstrated through their paper that they used a different type of learning where it didn't involve humans in the loop, and that kind of thing. Just quickly on the second thing, so distillation basically is you train a big model and you get that model to train smaller models. So you get that model to then teach smaller models what is the right and wrong answer. So once you've got a model like GPT-4 or GPT-01 or GPT-03, things like that, you can then use that to effectively pass on its knowledge, so to speak. So that act like a teacher to a much smaller model or a different model completely. And basically what you're doing is you're taking the superior knowledge of this big model and you're distilling that into a smaller model is what OpenAI have claimed that DeepSeek have done. So it's in OpenAI's terms and conditions that you can't do that. So what they're saying is they've got an API. DeepSeek, the company, have got an API call to ChatGPT to basically use that in some way to train their model, as far as I understand it.
Yeah. It's kind of karma if it's true for OpenAI, isn't it? Who, have got 1,000,001 lawsuits for data that they've been obtaining illegally and, scrubbing YouTube videos when they're not supposed to. The rumors, and I call them rumors, maybe I should call them conspiracy theories or truths, as I like to call them, as you know. But the rumor that I heard about chips, they had $1.5 billion worth of chips. Now, they are, like you say, they're a quant company. That's that's what they were set up to do. It wasn't to create large language models, so it could make sense that they didn't use them all, but it seems odd that you would, leave most of them in a cupboard while you train this model on just a small number that you had. So I think on that case, the original thing of, they only used 200 GPUs and 5.5 billion or whatever, 5.5 million US dollars seems like it may not be true. But I also think there is clearly, the US side have clearly been on the defensive here. There is a narrative here that they want, which is, this is one, the Chinese state are involved, the Communist Party, blah, blah, blah. Secondly, China's not able to do this without our technology. And some of this could be true. Like you say, I think we'll never know, but I think you have to take it all with a pinch of salt because from the US side, this has been embarrassing. And so, a lot of the comms that have been coming out, and the more rumors you spread, the more you start to confuse people, and it's the oldest kind of trick in the book. I think now we're in this position where we're like, oh, we will never know. That has already undermined the message that China has got ahead, which I think is intentional. I think the DeepSeek model. I still think a lot of people have missed. Why it's so good. And one thing that sort of anecdotally here in China, one thing that I found really interesting, there are some WeChat groups that I'm in, nothing to do with AI at all, but where people have not mentioned AI in those groups as long as I've been in them. And in fact, I've been giving information to people using AI that they didn't know about. Since DeepSeek came out, they've all started basically coming in with, they're checking DeepSeek and now they're taking everything it said as exactly true. And wow, how amazing this is. And I've pointed out to them that you've got models like Kimi in China. You've got, other models that have been there for a while that are not really that inferior to DeepSeek. And it seems to have, we talked about in the China episodes about how AI is more integrated here in people's lives, but they're not using large language models in the same way. It feels to me that in the circles that I'm not necessarily part of, but I'm sort of on the periphery of, that DeepSeek has been the catalyst in China, and now people are using DeepSeek daily for things that people in the West were using ChatGPT for a year or so ago. That's been a really interesting thing with DeepSeek for me. And I think, like I say, they feel like maybe because it's seen as being level with these US models, that DeepSeek is trustworthy in a way that they were just not using other large language models before. So I think there's another thing that's come out of it, which is not, doesn't impact the kind of global AI arms race or the impact on the sort of economy in the US and stock market crash in video, etc. But it is an interesting, another point where DeepSeek seems to have been a catalyst for much more adoption of large language model chatbots in China.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I would say is that, it depends on the domain that you're using it in. Like, I think I'd still go back to the fact, and I think this is still true of LLMs, it's still true of DeepSeek, it's still true of even the best models OpenAI have. If you're using a large language model to fact check something, to just be like, what's the capital of this country, what's this, like, to get factual information, I think Google search or some kind of search is your better option. Like, that's not really what they're good for. What they're good for is, especially the new models, DeepSeek and things like that, these models can reason and like actually help your thought process and help you think about things, and should be used alongside facts. I still think I think we're going to talk about deep research later on, which maybe changes the dynamic a little bit, and some of the search functions that are built into these models. But trusting what an LLM says when you're just asking it for facts, just trusting it categorically, is dangerous, because they do still hallucinate things, and I don't think that changes with the newer models. I think maybe it's reduced a little bit because they question themselves in a way that, like, sometimes when a model gives you an answer and you're not sure about the answer and you question it, it'll go back and think about it. In the old days, you could have that kind of conversation with an LLM, but I still think that using LLMs for that purpose is like not really the best use case.
It's not, but I think, I've said the same thing. I've said, the large language models were not created as an alternative to search. I think now, most of them, including DeepSeek, does have a search function, although most of the last week and a half it's been shut down because mix of too much traffic and attacks, etc. But I think we've also got to acknowledge that most people are not doing the things that you and maybe even I are doing on a day-to-day basis, and that most people's normal interaction with IT is to ask questions, and therefore it does give a much more natural interface. And I think it depends what you're checking and how important that information is. If you're asking for, a medical diagnosis is dangerous. If you're asking it if a certain medication will help with a particular condition, I think that information you can probably trust, because it's just telling you pathways, etc. So because I think this is a use that a lot of people are now using. People diagnose themselves using Google. We just sort of had this idea of sort of Google Doctor and people self-diagnosing. I actually think large language models in that way are a better way to do it. If you're asking for a bit of information, possibly. Is this true or false? And we've said this before. It's like, if there isn't a clear answer, then it's going to get confused because it depends where it looks for that answer. I'm sort of not disagreeing with you, but I think there's more of a kind of nuance to it, and it is more natural the way that you're asking questions. You could argue, use Perplexity, I still think Google at some point will have to have a great kind of search AI function just because of who they are. But I think you're right, and I think a lot of these people, they are just beginning to use large language models, so it's the normal way that most people get into it. But I do think you're right. I do think it has been not funny, but kind of worrying how they're now just, I asked DeepSeek and it said this, and in their head, it's just fact. They are absolutely bought into it, and they'll change their mind when it gets something wrong, something important wrong. And then it will be the kind of goes the other way and it's like, DeepSeek's rubbish. It just blah, blah, blah. And it's like, actually it's neither. It's somewhere between the two.
I would say, I can't remember who said this. Lots of people say this, I think. I would say trust but verify. Trust but verify. So, like, I'm inclined to trust large language models, and they get stuff right the majority of the time, which is what leans you towards trusting them. But as soon as you stop verifying things, and that applies to like something you read in the news, something you read on Google search, it applies to most things. Like, can you find it from another source, or is it just a one-off? And there are examples this week. Like there was an example about an AI model where it was about DeepSeek actually. So somebody and this has been repeated on YouTube. It's in Reddit. It's in all sorts of places. And what they were saying was DeepSeek's made itself 200% faster. This is the start of the AI revolution, like the singularity, the intelligence explosion, the hard takeoff, whatever you want to call it. And when you actually look into it, when you like really dig into it, because I watched a Matt Berman video, do like the guy, but I do verify some of the stuff he says, especially when I'm going to repeat it on my podcast, which is what I was about to do today, or our podcast, sorry. But so he's literally done an episode on YouTube where he's like, it's incredible, it's replicating itself, this is the hard takeoff. It's not replicating itself, it's improving itself. When you actually look into what was done, in a very narrow domain, someone fed DeepSeek information and asked it to improve an algorithm. Now, first thing is, the information on like how to improve that algorithm is actually already out there on the web and has already been done, I believe. So this is like not something new. And so like this is one of those things where it's like, okay, sounds true on the surface, lots of people talking about it, but when you actually go and verify it, it's a bit more sketchy and it's maybe on slightly thin ice. So, that's just an example from today that I found.
So are we in the hard takeoff or not? What's the final answer?
Are we in the hard takeoff? This is something I was going to talk about later on, but maybe
Dave Shapiro says we are. Dave Shapiro, by the way, I think he's now 100% just doing AI content again. So he's obviously giving up AI.
He's given up on AI.
He gave up straight away. I mean, he gave up within 2 days, didn't he, of giving up?
Yeah. I think we are fast approaching it. I don't know if we want to segue into something we're going to talk about later on, because it maybe fits in this segment. So we were going to talk about AGI and what DeepSeek means. And the thing is, like, when we talked about DeepSeek last time, I think I talked about the way it doesn't use reinforcement learning with human feedback, and it doesn't use human feedback at all, basically. And this is one of the really smart things about what DeepSeek have done. Like, this is genuinely going back to what we were talking about before, about whether they trained it for 6 million or whatever it was. In a way, it's kind of missing the point, because it was definitely trained for a lot cheaper than a lot of the big models. And they've open sourced this paper, they've open sourced all of their methods, and they genuinely did some innovative stuff that hasn't been done before in the West, or potentially hasn't been thought of. Or, I think there's like applications that they've made, there's like links that they've made which have actually genuinely been a surprise. And so basically what they've done is taken humans out of the loop completely, and having sort of looked into it more this week, I feel like the best analogy for it is, so what they do is, instead of using human feedback to input on the sort of thought mechanism that DeepSeek has, instead of like using humans to kind of say, this is correct, this is not correct, as you would teaching a human, what they've done is they've basically said, no, the model's just going to teach itself. We're just going to give it the right answers, and we're going to trust it to come up with the right reasoning to get to those answers. And what they found was that actually the reasoning started to make a lot of sense. Now, it didn't always reason in English. It was reasoning in different languages. There's some stuff on the internet about AIs even making up their own language because, our languages are not efficient enough, that kind of thing, to describe these concepts. But ultimately, the thing that I'd kind of missed a few weeks ago when we did the last episode was that by doing this like reasoning by inference, they're doing something similar to what AlphaGo did. So AlphaGo, for anyone who didn't know, basically was a deep learning model trained by Google that beat the best human player in the world at Go, and did it kind of like a lot earlier than was expected. And the clever thing about what Google did with it was they just let it learn the game of Go. They gave it the rules, they gave it something called a reward function, and they didn't give it any human inputs. They didn't say this is like a good move, this is a bad move, here's some like training data on good and bad moves. They didn't give it anything like that. They just said, this is the objective, go and figure it out. It played against itself like millions and billions of times, which is obviously what these AR models can do in these simulations. And it came up with genuinely innovative moves in the game of Go and to beat these human players. And this kind of feels like what DeepSeek have done with their model. What they've done is they've said, we don't really care how you get there, figure out the thinking by yourself, but these are the right answers. And obviously it's trained on like training data includes like all of the internet, same as ChatGPT and things like that. So it knows how to reason, it knows how to talk, so to speak. But as opposed to an LLM, which is just predicting the next token, what these models have now learned to do is learn how to think. But they've done it by themselves, without human input, without like any kind of, like I say, human feedback, basically. And so they're doing it in kind of novel ways. And this is the whole point of what I'm talking about right now is that whilst we've talked about this on the podcast before, we felt like with the current methods, LLMs were never going to get to something like AGI because they were never going to have a novel thought because all they're doing is predicting the next token, the next word, based on like the all of human knowledge, right? But if you're doing that, you're just parroting, right? You're always just parroting. We've said this before. You're never going to come up with something novel. DeepSeek has now learned to think. That's what they're training these models to do. They're training them to think, and that's different. That's different. And I like the thing that I think will be, and we said this before. The thing that I think will be really interesting is when AI by itself, or it might be with prompts, but like in a combination with a human, an AI has a genuinely novel thought. And something like that might be like connecting ideas from two different disciplines together that have never been connected in that way, and then coming out with a genuinely novel output. I'm not sure we'll get there with the current version of DeepSeek or even the current version of O3, but I think we're approaching that. And I feel like that's because these models have now, as opposed to being trained to parrot things very well, they've been trained to reason and think. Or they've learned how to reason and think by themselves.
So I think, in a sense, though, in a sense, though, Jimmy, does that not mean? And I'm not trying to change the sort of boundaries so that we can say we got it right. But when we talked about large language models plateauing, it was because there was no change in architecture. And I know this is not. This is still. It's still a neural network, right? And physically, it's still a load of GPUs put together. So in that sense, the architecture hasn't changed, but something has changed. It's not a large language model in the same sense. In fact, if we are talking about it, and I want to go on to this point in a little bit more detail, but speaking its own language, for me, then we're moving away from large language models because one of the limitations of the language model is, like you say, human language, and it is doing things in a way that is in line with human language. And therefore, that in itself is a limitation because, like you say, it's not a particularly efficient way of thinking. Now, the model, I think it was on DeepSeek R1 that flipped between English and Chinese and back again kind of randomly. That doesn't seem to be a particularly big concern. It's interesting. But if it starts thinking in its own language, the big issue there is that the one sort of main reason that kind of safety is still kind of possible is because it's done in language, you can look at the process and you can look at what it's doing. Once it starts speaking in its own language and you don't understand it, then it could be doing anything it fucking likes and you've got no idea. And so it seems like the developers knew that and had made a decision to stick with language to some degree. I don't know how much they had that choice and how much they knew they could allow it to think its own way, but they were intentionally doing that. Whereas now that the race seems to be on you know, and it is like it's kind of, you know, space race kind of thing now, isn't it? It's geopolitical.
Yeah.
That it feels like if they take that break off, the language break, it will probably mean you get some breakthrough advance, but you've lost a lot of control. That's pretty scary. And that's not just coming from me. A lot of the articles I've said about this are, you know, you do not want to be staring into the thinking of something that is a million times more intelligent than you. It's maybe not sort of super intelligence at that point, but actually the problem is you don't know what it is. So I think that's a kind of really interesting and quite frightening potential development, but it would indicate a big change in the kind of, even if it's not the physical architecture, it's the way that they think. And I would still say that is a change from the kind of it's a change from the large language model in the way that we were talking about the same thing, but just throw more and more compute at it and more GPUs at it. So it is a change, even if it's still using a neural network. I'm not sure, like once it moves away from human language, is it even a large language model anymore?
I guess it's I don't know. That's a difficult question. I think if it's using its own language, then probably yes. It's just that we don't understand it. But taking the speaking in tongues thing off the table for now, I think the big leap forward has been, and to be fair, like OpenAI knew about this a while ago, and Sam Altman has been privy to kind of inside information. I think what DeepSeek, and we actually knew that O1 had this thinking process. It's just it wasn't exposed to us. I think this is the clever thing about there's two things. There's the way DeepSeek trained their model, and as I say, taking humans out of the loop has resulted in this kind of like, it feels like it has resulted in this zero model idea. Like you start with like zero knowledge and you just let it train itself, which is, you know, it seems like it's a genuine advance. But also Sam Altman and OpenAI had, obviously they know what they're doing, you know, they know what they're doing and behind closed doors, and they've been talking about AGI in, you know, the next sort of 3 to 5 years. We've been saying we're not sure about that. I feel like more information's come out into the open now, and I feel like being privy to what DeepSeek have done has changed my opinion about whether we're going to get to AGI. Maybe not whether we're going to get to AGI, but as we said, like we didn't think we were going to get to AGI with the previous paradigm, like LLMs as they were. Now that I fully understand how DeepSeek's been trained, and not fully understand, but like have a better grasp of how DeepSeek's been trained, and it's like what's different about it. Suddenly I get it. I'm like, okay, this is like what people do when they think, as opposed to just parroting what's the next word in the sentence kind of thing. You know, which as good as you make that, I feel like that's never going to be the way to anything like AGI. I feel like we are now on that path. I don't know if we're at the hard takeoff, but I do think it could be less than a year away. So I mean, if by saying are we at the hard takeoff, you mean it's within a year, then yeah, maybe I would say that.
But when you would say the hard takeoff for what? I think we need to again, and we do this every week now, but we need to revisit what AGI, artificial general intelligence, means, because I do think AGI has impacts, but it's not as scary as artificial superintelligence. It's you know, it's the threat to everyone's job and it's going to change our whole world, but it's not necessarily going to wipe people out. So I think it's probably worth us, again, as much as we can, because there isn't an agreed definition. But when you talk about the hard takeoff, when you talk about we might get to AGI within a year, what would that look like to you?
So they're two slightly different things. The hard takeoff is about if you develop an AI that is capable of improving itself, then you're at something called the hard takeoff. It's basically where
singularity is
you go to
a more common term, isn't it, that people would know, I think.
Yeah, so singularity is sort of slightly after the hard takeoff, I guess, if you were putting them on a timeline. I think hard takeoff is like, okay, now we have exponential growth. Singularity Singularity is
happens
like
very quickly after the hard takeoff. Yeah.
very quickly after it, but singularity is like, okay, now we've completely lost control of it. It's effectively a superior being to us, and I don't know how soon after the hard takeoff in inverted commas that is, but potentially pretty quick. I mean,
it's my understanding that the singularity was that the singularity was when it didn't need humans and it was just exponentially training itself and just improving itself and improving itself. Yeah. That was the singularity.
Yeah, and that's the argument people have made online, which I have seen a little bit on. I think it was Reddit, to disclose my sources, but like people have been arguing back and forth, saying, well, if it's not an agent that's like literally self-improving itself, it still needs humans to go back and interact with it. Then it's not the hard takeoff, or it's not the singularity, depending on what your definition is, because it's not capable of acting on its own agency. It needs a human to kind of to go back and actually program the model or whatever it is. But I think you're kind of quibbling over definitions at that point. Like effectively the hard takeoff is you've got these big AI companies, they've got clever AIs, and all of a sudden they develop the ability to like self-improve. And the idea is like that initial self-improvement might be incremental, but very quickly, like every self-improvement you make makes the model more intelligent, which makes it able to figure out different, even better self-improvements. And then that's just a feedback loop.
And how long have we got left then, Jimmy?
I can't remember what predictions we made last year. We need to revisit them at some point.
I take it you're pulling your timelines forward.
It sounds like it. I mean, I think it's possible we'll see this kind of like this hard takeoff thing properly come to fruition in the next year. I still think it depends whether AI ends up being benevolent or not to what you say, like when you say like how long have we got left? Like there's no reason why an AI should necessarily be imbued with any resentment towards us. So I don't know.
We built it.
Maybe it'll be a fantastic.
It should be pandering to us as we built it.
Exactly. Like that's harder to answer, but I mean, maybe it'll be fantastic. Maybe it'll just solve all our problems, and we'll be in the utopia that we've discussed previously.
Let's hope so. So we've talked a lot about DeepSeek and the impact that it's made. I wanted to talk about sort of OpenAI, but this is also kind of linked to DeepSeek, because obviously OpenAI have kind of now just thrown out a load of new models. The thing that I found the most interesting as well is their interface today for ChatGPT just looks exactly like DeepSeek. You can now click to choose reasoning model as a kind of option. So rather than choosing the model, you click reasoning. It also has the search functionality as kind of a clickable option, which is exactly what DeepSeek looks like. So they've really kind of, they haven't even hidden the fact that they've copied they copied the interface the way that they've done it. I think the way that they're
considering their accusations.
Well, yeah, it's funny though that
it's like you copied us.
So we'll blame you and then sue you and then copy you. Their reasoning, it's not as cool. I haven't got a pro model, so maybe it does show you on the pro model. But when it tells you it's reasoning, it now says reasoning or thinking, and it tells you it's thinking. But it doesn't do what DeepSeek R1 does, where it tells you, okay, he asked me this, he thinks this, I should do this, I should do that. It doesn't give you that kind of full map. It just tells you that it's reasoning. But I saw an article where Sam Altman was saying he thinks they're on the wrong side of history and they should open source things and they're going to get new models out quicker and quicker. I mean, it's like, frankly kind of ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
But it's also,
I think it's
pretty amazing, isn't it? I mean, but it's pretty amazing how like the reaction and the way in which we said like DeepSeek has shook things up. I didn't think that they would pander in quite the way that they have been. But yeah, I mean, like the models just seem to be coming out thick and fast. Perplexity now has integrated DeepSeek R1 and ChatGPT 01 into Perplexity. So if you've got the Pro option, you can, choose to use those models for all of your searches and questions. I've downloaded, I know you've downloaded local DeepSeek models onto our computers. I mean, it feels like we've reached a kind of point that now everybody is just throwing new models. Gemini, I think Gemini 2.5 is it, or Gemini 2 Pro? So they've only got the Flash model at the moment, but the improved model is coming out. Weirdly, Anthropic seems to have done nothing. I still like Claude, but I think it's weird. You can't create any video. There's no multimodality. They don't seem to be updating. I'm sort of holding on to my subscription in the hope that they're going to come up with something amazing in the next few weeks. But it feels like they've been caught off guard, or like I say, hopefully they've got something in their pocket and they just haven't released it yet. But I mean, do you have any views on sort of new models? I still think OpenAI, ChatGPT at the moment, I have to say, I think it is the best model.
I think that OpenAI had some stuff that was sat in the wings. They were waiting to release things, and they were going to release things on a slightly slower timescale than they did. Now, well, I say that actually they said they committed quite a long time ago to releasing O3 Mini, I think it is. Or is it O3? I don't know. They committed.
O3 was the one that we were talking about, sort of $10,000 a query. So I think it must be O3 Mini, mustn't it? I'm sure the full model, they can't have made the cost savings that quickly.
So they were talking about releasing that at the end of January, and they did. And so some people have come out and said they released it in a panic because DeepSeek came out. Actually, that's technically incorrect, because they did say, even before DeepSeek was a thing, they said a long time ago. But I think what you're seeing is a mixture of, we'll release everything we've got, but like literally now they're not really ahead of open source, and then you've also probably got, I think Anthropic probably don't have anything, is my guess, and so they're working on they're going to carry on working on the next thing. The problem for Anthropic to a greater extent, I think, because they're a smaller company. And companies like Mistral, Mistral open source a lot of stuff, but they also have their own models that are closed source and stuff. But for companies like Anthropic, they're probably pretty screwed by this kind of thing, because they're right in the middle, right? Like DeepSeek's basically exposed all of them, but Anthropic don't have the kind of like investment and don't have the amount of cash that companies like OpenAI have. OpenAI will be okay. It's thrown them a curveball. Google are obviously going to be okay. Meta, of course, they're going to be okay. Like, it's not their main business model. I think Anthropic are in one of the worst places here, because they're not open source, they're closed source, but they're also not huge, and they don't have the sort of capital behind them that some of these other companies have. So Anthropic probably are in a really sketchy place. That being said, Anthropic have also been releasing papers and all this other kind of stuff, and they're obviously involved in the community. They do a lot of like collaborative research type stuff. So I'm not 100% sure on that side, but I think in terms of their closed source models, they're probably under threat quite a lot. In terms of which models are the best, like the very best model is still GPT, but it's very expensive. And obviously not for you or I. You pay your $20 a month, you get access, or I think you might even be able to get O3 Mini for free now. But they must be quickly reevaluating what they can do for how much money and how many data centers they need and what's the cost of it all. Like, it's going to have a big impact on OpenAI, because you can't be doing something that's just a little bit better than an open source model and charging $20 a month for it, or $200 a month for it in the case of like the like top tier.
Although you say that, apparently their Pro tier has been massively oversubscribed, and they're losing money on the Pro tier because it's being used more than expected. But I think something like they're making $300 million a year in subscriptions on the Pro model, I think. So,
wow.
Well, they're not making money, so they're generating revenue because apparently they're losing loads of money on them. But it's been a lot more popular than anybody expected, including them, apparently. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily change or say what you're saying is incorrect, but I think there are people willing to pay, and organizations and, you know, users who use it professionally who are willing to pay that. I'd actually say it's the sort of $20 a month models that are the one under threat. Like, I wonder how long that lasts for. You either have a you know, a enterprise model that you pay a significant fee for, or you just use it for free. I think that's probably where we end up, to be honest.
Yeah, it's kind of dropped the middle out of it. Maybe you're right. Either way, I think Anthropic are pretty screwed. Would be my take on it. But yeah, like as to the rest of it, so Sam Altman talking about we're on the wrong side of it. I mean, it's an interesting one, that, like, he's either, because I don't personally know Sam Altman, and although we've had a bit of a gripe in the past, like, he's either been extremely honest and just been straight up genuine, like, okay, yeah, we missed the trick here, and open source has actually turned out to be where it's at, or he's playing some kind of game. I'm not sure what. You know, trying to spin off another company. Not sure what they'd call it, given the company they've got is called OpenAI. But yeah, not sure where I lie on that. He's a peculiar figure, Sam Altman. I think it's possible he's just like straight up being like, this is what I think.
Yeah, I still think he ends up. I don't think he lives to a ripe old age. Let's put it that way. I think he's going to be a target.
He's going to live forever, mate.
I don't think so. I think he becomes a target because he's the face of it, and I think when people start to realize the effect that it's having on their lives, I think he becomes a target. But what do I know, Jimmy?
Sorry,
I'm just a lowly podcast host.
He'll just get beamed back up out of his body.
Maybe. I wanted to talk about, and it does flow from that because it's Google and Anthropic, but the story this week has been Google reneging on their sort of policy to not use AI for military purposes.
Yeah.
But, you know, people have also missed the fact that Anthropic recently announced the partnership with Palantir. I don't know if you're Palantir. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. As you know, I have an issue with pronouncing anything. So they basically provide US intelligence and defense agencies access now to Claude 3 models. I presume it's 3.5, but the Claude 3 series of models. So if you look at, you know, those military partnerships with civilian cloud computing companies, the US is ahead of China on that front. And they now have potentially partnerships with Google. We know we have someone from, or an ex, of course, retired military general on the board of OpenAI. We have a partnership with Anthropic. It feels like, I mean, I don't know. Part of this is this about making money? Is it we just need to throw off all the shackles because we desperately need to make money? Is it about US China? Is it about playing up to what Donald Trump wants? You know, whatever it is, there's been a big narrative
all
change. People are not even, organizations are no longer even pretending to care about safety or pretending to care about, you know, ethical uses of AI. And that has come about as the sort of government has changed over. Like I say, whether that's a coincidence, whether they've been empowered and emboldened to do it by a new government, whether they feel they have to do it, whether it is about a race, whether it's about geopolitics, whether it's a mixture of them all. But it is pretty foreboding, to be honest. I mean, I think we've said this many times. But AI was possibly the only technology that there's ever been, certainly in modern history, where there was a time that it's felt like the civilian use of it was ahead of the military use. Now that has long gone. Yeah. I don't think it was ever in doubt that it was going to be used by the military. It's more the fact that it is now not even being, you know, these organizations not even hiding their intentions. They don't even care about the public perception.
Yeah. But I think that's what this story does. This story in my opinion, this story exposes this fact to the public. However, was AI being used in the military before? Like Google were not in control of that. Google is just one company, right? So like, I don't want to defend Google because I think what they've done is openly sort of said this. I mean, I don't even know if they've done that. They've obviously changed their sort of mission statement, I think, and a long time ago it was "Don't be evil." I think
Yes,
was their mission statement. They changed that quite a while ago.
Don't do evil.
Now they've taken this out. Don't do evil. Ultimately, like it wasn't Google's decision whether AI is going to be used in the military. It's governments around the world have the option as to whether AI can be used in military applications because it's governments that control militaries. In most cases, in some countries, militaries control governments, but like aside from the edge cases, governments control militaries. Governments decide whether militaries can use AI. Like, okay, all of the companies could get together and say, you're not having our AI. Pretty unlikely. At the end of the day, this is a decision for governments and organisations like the UN and the European Union and some of these kind of like big governmental organisations to make decisions about. And
I'm not sure the UN has much of a say on it, but okay.
Well, they've got influence. They have influence, maybe, but it's clearly at that level. It's clearly at that level where it would take the US to say we're not going to use AI in military applications. And the thing is, like, if you look at
it would take every country to agree. Because if one country uses it, then other countries. It's exactly the same as nuclear in that respect. And as long as one country has it, nobody else will say, "Well, I'll give it up." So either everyone agrees or no one agrees.
But it's also a nonsense. Like drones use AI. Like the reason drones work, the reason drones can fly, they don't use the kind of AI we're talking about with like LLMs and things like that. But they use AI. They've got reinforcement learning, AI, all this kind of stuff built into drones. The way drones can fly today is because they were trained with AI. So if you're talking about taking AI out of the military, like these things have been used already all over the world. They've been used to make very cheap, kind of like bombs where you can just strap a grenade to a drone and fly it over a border and drop it on somebody. That's been done like for the last good few years. We've seen that, and it's disgusting. And obviously, you don't want to see it. Most people don't want to see war at all. But to say that like Google stepping back from their commitment about not allowing AI to be used in military applications, I mean, it's that ship has sailed, to be honest.
I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Mate. But I could say, by using AI, military strikes they'll be able to do them with more precision and it will save lives. And, that statement can be true at the same time as AI in the military can cause a lot of harm. I'm not saying that necessarily is a justification for some of the things that AI will definitely do in warfare and in the military. But, you can make a case that, like with all of this stuff, the AI is not the problem. We're not at the point of ASI. We're not at the point of AI being in control. AI will be a problem because people will use it in a way which causes a problem. So I sort of agree with you, but I think it, like you say, and I also agree with that statement that puts it out there clearly to people that, nobody gives a shit about you, right? AI is going to develop the way in which all technologies develop because it's going to be done to you and you're going to live with it and you're going to accept it and you have very little choice in it. But now at least people can kind of see AI with all its kind of warts is kind of out there. But yeah, I completely agree with you. The Google story is kind of a non-story, particularly because we know that Anthropic were working with the military and we know that OpenAI have a military general. I forgot to talk about this in the first section on DeepSeek, but one of the things that struck me this week, there was a comment from an Oxford University professor kind of warned people in the UK about using DeepSeek because the Chinese state would have access to all of your information, which, I don't disagree with that comment. You're right. But it's this idea that, where were these warnings with putting your data into ChatGPT and everything else. And this idea that, the US military, the FBI, the CIA, whoever, wouldn't be able to demand that data if they wanted access to it. Again, it's not that the sort of comments against China are necessarily wrong, but it's the fact that kind of China is picked out as being so dangerous, but yet with us ignoring the fact that, no, we shouldn't be trusting any of these models, and the information is not going to be given to anybody at any point. It's like, if you don't want that information out there, don't put it into any of those models. Don't think about whether it's the Chinese Communist Party or the American government that's going to listen to it. Just, consider any information you put into any large language model. And I think, that is what everyone should be looking at with this. Is it doesn't matter which country it is. It doesn't matter which military it is. It doesn't matter who's got that information. Be skeptical of the use and the way in which the data is used by any of these organizations.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think it depends in the West, right? So like obviously I think one of the examples was the UK Navy have been told they're not allowed to use it, or it's been banned in the UK Navy. Now, that's probably fair enough. It's a model that's based in China. It's running on Chinese servers. China's government's going to have access to it. Like, hopefully no one will be stupid enough to put like military secrets into it, but I can understand cutting the Navy off from using a Chinese search engine effectively. The search engine / data collection thing / AI model, whatever. Like, to be fair, I think if Baidu became really popular, which is a search engine in China, if Baidu became really popular in the Navy, they'd probably be like, "No, we're not having that." So that's probably fair enough. But there's nuances, right? And so I agree. I agree that with what you're saying, but I think the other difference is 99% of the public in China can't access ChatGPT because they have a great firewall. The West doesn't have a great firewall, so maybe there is a bit of an argument to sort of put a bit of information out there to say, by the way, this is how your information may or may not get used.
True, but that's not the argument. Is it? The argument here is not. The argument here is not. Whether China should allow those models or not. The point that I'm trying to make, and I think even the example that you just gave, the UK and the US are allies, so of course you would be less worried. But if I was the UK military, the Navy, I wouldn't want to give my information to any country, whether they're my ally or not, because, we know the US has spied on Germany. We know Germany, all these stories in the past of allies spying on each other. Everybody is spying on everybody. I know the degree of that is different. And I understand the fact that, China and the US are rivals, China and the UK are not, they don't have that kind of alliance. But my point here is not about saying you shouldn't criticize China. My point is that this criticism of China and this be scared of China is, the message should be broader than that. You can say you should be more bothered by China, you should be more scared, but it's the fact that you're now telling people not to put their information in there. You should have been telling them a year ago to be careful, because that you can't have that trust with any of these kind of. Maybe I'm a bit more cynical than you. I don't think I know there are things in place that legally it's more difficult, but I'm pretty sure if the CIA, the FBI, DARPA, anyone like that want to get information from OpenAI, Anthropic, any of these companies, they will get it. So, the information is not much more secure. That's my point. It's not you should trust a Chinese model, it's you shouldn't trust any.
I agree. Although there are large parts of the European Union that banned the use of ChatGPT a very long time ago. So I think that is being applied.
Well, Meta's still not available, is it, in the EU?
Well.
Meta's not available in the EU, I think, still.
And it's maybe for different reasons, but I think a lot of it is about data collection and data privacy. And the EU's obviously really hot on that. So I don't think it's necessarily a kind of one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Let's finish this episode off with a maybe more optimistic. We'll finish it with an optimistic song if you want, but a bit of a more optimistic one, which is Deep Research, which confusingly, at the same time, OpenAI and Google have both released something called Deep Research. I don't get this. Like, how have they not come up with their own names? I know Google released it first, but surely they can't both call it Deep Research. But anyway, they have Deep Research, the Google model. So there's a really good article by Professor Ethan Mollick, which you can read on Substack, which talks about the two models and tests them really well. The Google model apparently is, so that basically they go away and do research. So they're almost kind of agentic in a sense that they go away and do stuff for you. They will produce a piece of writing, a report, a thesis, whatever. And they'll go away and they'll research. They can't get into paywalled sources at the moment. That's one of the issues. So they only have sort of limited access to stuff which isn't paywalled. So if you're doing sort of like me, who's doing sort of research project at the moment, most of the decent articles that you access, you'll need to go through the paywall, which you can use your kind of university or academic institution's account, but you would need to get into an account. You can't do that with either of these. So as my understanding, it's still quite limited in the articles it can access, but it can access journals as long as they don't, like I say, don't have a paywall. It can access academic articles. It can then write a piece of research referenced with a bibliography. And the Google model, which is a little bit older, I think it's maybe a couple of months older now. It apparently writes to sort of undergraduate level, so a kind of undergraduate thesis, dissertation. The new OpenAI model, which is only available on the pro tier at the moment, I believe, that can produce research to I think it was graded as a beginner PhD. So someone who is just starting their kind of first year of a PhD to that level. With the limitation, like I say, that it will not be able to get paywalled sources. So it's quite limited in its sources. But in terms of the quality of the work, it is equivalent of a sort of beginner PhD. So I think this is, potentially, massive. Like, if it gets around that paywalled issue, or you find a way to access it, is not saying academic research is dead, but I'm writing a research paper. Why should I bother? If in a year's time, maybe it's lucky in a sense that I'm at this point, or maybe it's unlucky, I'm not sure, but in a year's time, will anybody be writing this kind of research for themselves unless they are highly motivated to do it? Because I think for some people, like, the research is the fun part, but
they're not already. Which student finishing their bachelor's or their master's cannot find $200 for a month of maybe that's why we've got so many subscriptions going on that they weren't expecting. Like, who can't find $200 to write their dissertation?
No, but what I'm saying is, at the moment, it's still not quite at that point, because although the quality of the work is maybe good enough, the articles and the kind of journals, etc., that it can access, you wouldn't have a good enough quality bibliography for it to be of a PhD or master's level at the moment. But that's probably 6 months to a year away. Yeah, I think you're right. But then again, you were the one who argued a while ago about learning, and you do learning because you want to learn. So it depends why you're doing it. If you're getting a qualification because you want the qualification, yeah, why bother? If you're getting it to learn, it's a bit different. I don't think it's that. I think it's just the death of this kind of research project, to be honest. I don't see this existing in 2 or 3 years' time.
I stand by what I said. People who want to learn. But a lot of people do a qualification for the same reason a lot of people do a job they're not that bothered about. They do a qualification because they think they need a qualification, and then they end up at university. But
like I say, I think the answer is in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, maybe even less than 3 years' time, maybe a year's time, those academic institutions are going to have to change the way that they assess, and they're already starting to look at that, to be honest, but they're going to have to change the way they do it, because writing a report, article, etc., is not going to prove someone's learning. So I think that's what happens. Research, there will still be researchers. A lot of research will be done by AIs. But in terms of someone who's doing a master's, like, PhD is a bit different because you're pursuing the research at that point because you want to. But a bachelor and a master's, you're going to have to assess it differently because, people, you can't do it at the moment. If you can use things like Perplexity in place of search functions, but you can't do research to that level because it just doesn't work yet. But if these things are able to do that research now, the only thing that's in their way, from what I'm saying now, is a way to get around a paywall. Once you've got around the paywall, it's able to do master's, PhD level research projects.
But let's go back to the original point of our podcast, Matt. Why is anyone doing these projects in the first place? Once you get an AI that can do it all, this was the whole point of our podcast right from the beginning, right? Like, what's the impact going to be on jobs? What's the impact going to be on universities and education? Like, I think there will be a big impact, because if you're there because you want to learn, because you're interested in a subject, then you'll probably still go to university in the future. In a world in a year's time where AI can do all that research and do all that stuff for you, and then can do the job that you would have done anyway when you finish your degree, then what are you doing at university? To be honest, I would kind of argue that anyway, even in the past, like, what are you doing at university if you don't really want to learn something? But a lot of people do go to university, despite the fact that they're probably not that bothered. I think that becomes even less relevant in the not that distant future, where,
I have this conversation with, I have this conversation. So my kids are 5 and 5.5 and almost 3. And I have this conversation with people where they talk to me about university and, will they go to university in the UK or in China, and I say, you can't think about that. I said, because I don't think university will exist in the way that you think of university. I'm not saying universities won't exist, but what universities do will be so different from your concept. We cannot consider for our kids in 14 years' time what that's going to look like. Maybe there will be university. I'm sure there will be some form of university, but like you say, maybe it will be there for going and doing the things that you want to learn. Maybe it will be completely online. Maybe it'll be the complete opposite, and the people that go to university will want to have nothing to do with doing it online. It will be about learning, manual skills, and it'll be learning how to do things that, that are useful because they're the kind of things that we need to do. Or it will be purely about learning how to work with AI. Like, whatever it is, I think we haven't even thought of it yet. So I do agree with you.
I agree.
And I sort of agree with you and disagree with you. But I think where I think you're 100% right, is you writing this kind of report as a way to assess somebody's sort of level of knowledge. It's just, I'm maybe the last year, maybe there's one more year left of people doing this before they have to find a completely new way to do it. It's not a test anymore. Once this is able to conduct that research and do 12,000 words instead of 4,000 words and access all sources of information, then there is no reason for people to do research other than if they are committed to that as their entire sort of job or career. And even then they'll be using AI to do the bulk of the work. I'm sure that's how it will be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this stuff is supposed to be a demonstration of you've learned what you've learned, right? And if it becomes irrelevant because you can just get an AI to write it, then as a test, it's kind of pointless. But I think, as I say, I think it goes beyond that. Like, if you're at the point where AIs are already able to do all that, then what are you
They're not
doing?
the things you need to be learning.
Well, no, but it's not that's not the things we need to be learning. Like, if you want to learn that, then go and learn it. Fine. But if you want to learn it and you really want to learn it, then maybe you still write the dissertation, because if you're interested in doing it anyway, then why would you not? Like, but it will become I don't know whether this is
passion
sad or
project.
not. Yeah, exactly. It's like learning will become a hobby, which I think it is for some people now. But we're talking about a future where AI can do everything better than we can. I don't know whether that's like next year or in 5 years' time, but I feel like it's around the corner. And so then learning becomes a hobby for humans. And maybe that's sad, but that's probably where we're going.
Well, I think you said to me in a message the other day that you've come around to my useless eaters idea, haven't you? You think that that's where we're that's where we're going to end up?
Yeah, it's become a really bright and cheery end to the podcast.
Well, I'm just happy because that episode hasn't got as many listeners as I'd hoped. So maybe people should go back and listen to my Useless Eaters episode now.
Go back and listen to Matt's Useless Eaters episode. Not to depress people even further, but I think this is an opportunity. I think this week it's going to be pretty hard to put a song together. So maybe we don't have a song at the end of this week's episode, unless you can knock one up, Matt. In which case you can just cut this bit and just do a different bit.
You think it's depressing that we're not going to have a song, or you think it's depressing? This episode is so depressing that we can't put a song on the end of it. Is that what you mean?
No, I think that I don't have time to do it. The opportunity for people out there is you can go and create one yourself on Suno. and play it back and just.
I think most people listening are like, "Oh, is there usually a song at the end?" I usually turn it off once I say goodbye.
Fair enough. Well, there may or may not be a song.
Yeah. So listen for 3 seconds at the end and find out whether there's a song or not. Right. Thank you for listening, everyone. Next week. And this was completely coincidentally, but we have an episode on AI in military use with retired Brigadier Tim Law. So that will be, I'll say that will be fun. I mean, we've already recorded it, so we know it's fun. But listen out for that one. And have a good week, everyone. Take care.
They say the future's dark, but I've seen darker days when hope was just a spark lost in fear's haze. Every headline screams collapse, every tweet predicts decay, but in between these synaptic gaps, light finds its way. See, fear's an easy sell. It hooks into our core, makes every story tell of locks and bars and doors. But hope's harder work. It's scaffolding and stairs, building bridges where shadows lurk, repair by repair. I'm not talking blind faith here, not some fairy tale delight, but the grit that appears when we choose to fight. For every ended story, there's 10 more just begun. For every faded glory, there's tomorrow's rising sun. The choice was never fear or flight. The choice was never sink or swim. The choice is, will we light the path for those who follow in? Will we plant the seeds that grow through concrete and through pain? Will we be the bridge, the flow, the shelter from the rain? Fear says lock your doors and hide. Hope says learn and grow and build. Fear says choose your side. Hope says watch what we can yield. Together, step by step, through darkness into dawn. Each footprint that we've kept shows others they belong. So face the future, step